Hey everybody, welcome back to John McCoy Art. If you're new to the channel, I am Illustrator John McCoy, and today we're going to learn a great technique for blocking in proportions when you're doing your drawing. In this case, we're going to use an Asian elephant, which is a still frame I took from a 4K video I shot at the Cincinnati Zoo. And if you haven't seen that video, you might want to check it out. It's pretty cool. But here what we've done so far, done a little bit of groundwork, is very roughly and loosely put in a sort of a 16:9 ratio rectangle, and that'll be the boundaries of our picture our picture plane. And then I've roughed in, as you can see, the wall, the little natural wall in the background, and then this building here in the background of the image, and then the border of the water. Now the simplest way, and this you may have noticed this is in some of the Andrew Loomis techniques in How to Draw with Fun with a Pencil, the series we made. The easiest way to block in a subject is to understand how it fits into the space. And we can do this by first seeing how our subject, the entire elephant, fits into a rectangle. So what we're going to do is realize that the top of the elephant's head does not go much farther than the top of this wall that we've created. Okay, and then the back of the elephant, it's kind of nice that we've drawn the edge of this building, or these pillars of this building. There's 4 pillars, kind of equally divided. And when we've drawn those, we know that the elephant's back, the very back of it, does not go meeting even to this pillar. So we can draw the edge of the rectangle. And then where does it stop here? Well, we're going to consider the trunk of the elephant as well. And we can consider the elephant's proportions as the overall picture frame. And the whole, it takes about half of it. So we're going to go from that edge to the back edge to about half of the picture frame. It doesn't have to be perfect. And this will be the farthest boundary of that elephant's nose. And the elephant's feet basically stop right at the line where the water meets the shore. So here we have the whole boundary. But now we can think in terms of subdividing this rectangle further to define the proportions. What's the next biggest division we're going to make in this rectangle? And I would say that it's the bottom of the belly to the bottom of the feet. How far is that? It's almost halfway between the top line of the water and the bottom line of the wall in the background, but a little closer to the wall in the background. So we can kind of rough that in and just draw that in, and we've subdivided that. The back of the head to the farthest part of the front of the trunk reaching out, how big is that compared to the rest of the elephant's body? So what I'm looking at is it's about half. So you can kind of rough that in. If we draw a line here, that is about halfway there. Now we might consider the 2 front legs as being a rectangle in themselves as well. Going further and doing that, and then the same with the back legs. I would say it's probably a good idea to just exercise some confidence and just go for it. Now, how far down does the trunk go? To me, it goes about the same distance of the belly. So the trunk is going to be not going any further than here. That's why it's important that we drew that rectangular line. And now we're starting to see the elephant taking shape. So the space from the bottom of the jaw to the bottom of the trunk part is less than the bottom of the jaw to the top of the head. So again, that may be about halfway. So we're going to say something about this right there. So now we've got the trunk. And now we can think in terms of knowing that this is where the back of the head is, we can think in terms of that angle, because there's a sloping angle that happens something like this. That is that angle of the trunk coming out, because the trunk changes right about here and swings back and creates a little loop. We don't have to get crazy with that detail, but we've already seen how that is starting to happen. The legs into 2 parts here. There's a little space between it. You can think of the angles of the legs going down, and then that other leg, is behind it, thinking of the overall proportion. And then this leg, this little piece that hits the ground, is just flattened out, which always happens by the weight of the elephant. Is looks like a little suction cup or something, but really it's because of the weight just pushing down that foot. And then you can draw the other foot, which doesn't touch the front of the back foot, or the foot that's closer to us, and it's not the back foot, it's from the one in the front, but you know what I'm saying. And then the other one goes up and then comes down at an angle. And now you've got those feet. And now you can do the same with the back one and actually look at what you're drawing and think about what does it actually look like. I just see like this concave shape here. And then basically we've already blocked out that this is the bottom. So the feet, you already know the length. They're not going to go down here. They're going to stop here. Okay, so now we're going to draw that other leg. And you'll see it's a little bit in shadow, but you'll see basically this leg comes down here. There's a shape here. And you got that leg, and then this one comes in front, and it almost visually touches the back of this leg here and comes down like that. And then the angle is something like this. Okay, we can rough in the tail, which visually on the picture plane goes about as far down as the belly of the elephant, which we'll put that about the same height, maybe a little higher. And then just the curve goes up and almost meets the top of that rectangle, because this whole body here creates like a rectangle basically. And so that tail will wrap around. If you would like, you can rough in the shadow of the elephant behind it. And the distance of that, you can use the distance, the width of this foot is about the same, so you can put a marker there. And then how high up does it go? It goes about this point here. Always look in terms of where do things meet angles and points on there to do your measuring. It's a pretty efficient way of doing it. And then you can go ahead and shade that in. Now we can start to draw the musculature of the elephant. And we can see that the elephant has a pinnacle on its back that goes a little higher than the rest of it. And you can just kind of visually look, where does that happen in this rectangular space? And then it arches up. And we can exaggerate that slightly if we want. So like so. Now, since we know the head stops here, and we have this little point, the neck is about to, remember, this is the bottom of the mouth, and since we have this angle, we want to draw that angle in first and realize that the neck is slightly higher than the bottom of that line we created. So to do that, we may want to look at, on our reference image, where does the uppermost shadow, you have light on the top of the back, and where's the highest shadow happen? It happens somewhere around here, and we can divide that space. So the highest shadow meets here, this is all light here, and then how does that play out? Well, the shadow of the ear actually goes slightly behind the line we created, which is the edge of the head, because the shadow actually casts further than the ear itself. And now we're starting to get into the head a little bit, but we have the shadow of the head there. Now we'll get back to the musculature and how we define that by shadow. And then you can divide where the top of this shadow happens based off our rectangle and the whole torso and how far it is. And to me, it's about halfway through that rectangle. And then just kind of keeping an eye on portions. We have like this shadow here, and then this deeper shadow right about here that we draw in. And then it comes around again like this. Keep in mind how we shade to show that shadow. As it has a rounded shape, we can draw it like that, because it's going to follow the same pattern as that. This is basically like a sphere, sort of. And then there's another little shadow back here, and then that just goes straight back, and then everything below this point is in shadow. We can basically take and shade in everything. Not worrying too much. Trying to keep our tone even. Following it all the way up to the contours we created, those contour lines. And we're literally shading everything to the borders of the lines we created for the elephant, all the way up. Why? Because it's good to simplify shadow, because it actually creates a more three-dimensional type of form. We read it better and clearer if we're not getting mixed tones, and also leads us to not be confused about making certain areas more in shadow or less in shadow. We can do that later when we block things in. We can also block in the background a little bit. We have that building that we talked about in the background. And you'll notice the more you do it, the more you draw the shapes and forms, the easier it is to see the proportions. You'll gain like a map awareness of the drawing you're doing. And mostly this is all in shadow, except it stops about here. The shadow stops about here. There's a little bounce light. This is pretty much all in shadow. So you can actually just block that in as well. You can actually see there's a silhouette too of the elephant. So if you want to, in the water. So if you want to follow those proportions down as well, using the picture plane in this space here to decide where exactly those go, you can see that. And you can see how it's basically a perfect reflection of the elephant itself. If you want, you can use a lateral stroke here as you're shading, and it's light, not as dark as the actual elephant, so maybe lighten up on the pencil strokes, but you can keep it lateral to show the perspective of the water too. Now let's jump in to the elephant's head. First of all, we need to know where the lip of the elephant stops and begins. And basically in this whole rectangular space, I see it as being about halfway, and creates this little shape. And then you got the trunk that loops around here. Don't make the trunk too big. Be aware of the negative space here so that you can determine the actual size and thickness of the trunk. This whole trunk is, the bottom part is basically in shadow. So you can get that little shape of the trunk and then literally shade in all of this part of the trunk. That's not too difficult to do, actually. So now you've got that roughed in. Now we're getting closer. The more, it's like a puzzle. Basically, the more information you put down, the more you're aware of exactly how far. Another thing we can do is keep in mind that the wall is in shadow back here as well. So we can shade in that wall too. Use the same directionality of our strokes in the background to shade in this half of the wall on the other side. Okay. So shade that in. Now we're seeing our picture coming to life. Now, this one, I would say don't overthink the details at first. There's a lot of detail going on in the face, in the head of the elephant, but we don't want to be scared off or be afraid to put in the detail. We can block in the ear next, and keep in mind the back of the ear falls right in that line we originally put in here, just a little past it, of the line that shows how thick the head is of the elephant. And the bottom of the ear doesn't go to the bottom of the jaw here. It's a little higher. So we can draw in that ear and then see how far between these two spaces, how much space we've got to draw the shape of that ear. And the ear itself is not completely in shadow. This is where you start to get details coming in. It's got these wrinkles in there that we can rough in. You don't have to get too, you can be very loose with your pencil and stuff and still show a lot of information. And then up here we have this shadow that doesn't block the whole ear because some of the ear is in light. And then we have that back shadow there, like so. And then we have an eye shadow basically here. And then this jaw is in shadow as well. So we basically finished roughing in the elephant. You can see the overall form of the elephant. Behind it, there's like a patch of dirt that goes up here and then has this grass. You can rough it in a little more detail with the land, the way it curves back. And you can see, like with these pillars, okay, there's a pillar here. The pillar is dark. There's a roof panel here and some other roof panels, and there's some trees. Very lightly roughing that in. And then between, you have these pillars. You had 4 pillars, as I said, some architecture here, and then to the left, to the right of this pillar, you have a little window, and then you had another little window on the right of that pillar as well. In the background, you have trees, you have the trunks themselves, and then right about halfway in this space here begins the actual trees, foliage itself, and more trees, and then you have more trees here, but really, if you analyze them as values that take up space, because we don't want to get too detailed in the background, they're really just areas of value, because we're drawing in black and white. We basically just need to draw accurately what we're seeing, and you will see the same image appear in front of you. So it suggests the form, as long as the proportions are correct and they're in the right space. You can see there's some sky in the background back here, but we can kind of roughly shade in everything but the sky. The sky is going to be our lightest point. So you can shade behind that. And actually what that will do is allow the elephant's back, the lighting on the elephant's back, to pop out a little bit. Okay, now let's think about shadow down here, shade down here. What's going on down here? There got our shadow here. And you'll notice that the water itself has these shaded reflections of the trees and different things behind. So we should kind of rough those in. Keep your strokes lateral to match the ripples of the water. There's a little bit of shadow right under the elephant. There's a bank here, which we can rough in just by some line, some representation of line, and then some more ripples of reflections that are coming from above. At this point, basically, we can now think about what areas are actually darker and how can we add a little bit of detail to our elephant here. You can see how there's a dark shadow behind and between the back side of the animal and the tail itself. And then this part of the tail actually has a little bit of shadow as well. You'll notice another thing too is that you have this top area of shadow, but then there's another change in form here where it gets even darker. So if we wanted to find that space, we can go ahead and show that change of tone, which will add more depth to our image. And we'll actually show some of the musculature and skeletal structure of the animal without getting too detailed. This area under the belly is very much in shadow, not any bounce light really. Maybe a little bit of bounce light, but we're not even able to really perceive it that well. And then think about how that gets darker down there. And then this whole, like I said, these legs of the animal are very much in shadow. You can just kind of show that this is all very much in shadow. So we're adding shading to this area. You also are not obligated to draw the line there. That's an artistic liberty, because you're trying to tell the truth about what you're seeing. And honestly, what I'm seeing, I can barely tell that there's a line there, but I do know if I look carefully that that leg of that animal is. So if I want to, I can put a line there that indicates that the leg is actually going in front of the other leg. So we have kind of a dark shadow here that quickly fades off. So now this shadow here goes all the way up here, and you can see how there is a distinction between this leg and this crevice of the animal that is deeper in shadow. So we are going to show that because we're, again, telling the truth with what we're seeing, and that will define the form that we're seeing. This part is very much in shadow, very dark, very much connects to the bottom of the belly of the animal. And then down here, this whole leg, if I was to analyze it, its darkest point is down here at the bottom. And so we can draw that very dark. And actually, to me, what I'm seeing is a gradient that goes up this way with a line of shadow here. So this is dark, that's dark. You can start with your darks and then actually fade up, because that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a gradient. So I'm going to show what I'm seeing, and that'll describe the form better than if I was to just make it up. So I'm actually just trying to like show what I'm seeing, and that's going to give more realistic results. Same here. There is a very dark shadow here that very much tells us that this is a different leg of the animal. There's actually a line of shadow here that shows a muscle, and then another shadow right here. So you can see a distinction there and a second highlight there at that point. And also a highlight here. You can see a light side of this, even though it's in shadow more so than the top of the animal. You're just describing what we're seeing here. Now, same thing's going on up here. The whole trunk here is very dark. There's an area of shadow here, so we can shade that in, but be careful, because on this side you can see there's a highlight that goes all the way down the trunk. And that's something, if you want to do, you can pull out with an eraser later. A slight shadow here, little shadow here for the eye, and then a wrinkle under there, which kind of tells some detail without actually forcing it into the viewer. And then this area in the mouth is very dark, and it goes almost up to the eye, which is very interesting to me. And then we draw the shadow here, and then this area right under the ear is extremely dark. So we're going to be honest about that too. And then we're going to draw the edge of the ear. Very dark here. Very dark here. A lot of shadow. But some people might be tempted to take that dark shadow and put it here. But if you look carefully at the image, that isn't happening. So don't exaggerate too much in that sense. You can add lines to show things and to describe things that aren't necessarily 100% a copy of the image. But that's all right, because it's kind of the point of drawing. You want to change it. You want to actually take those artistic liberties. Here I'm adding a little bit of shadow because there's more shadow that defines this separation in the wall. If you want, you can have fun with the image and actually get a pen out to add some extra little detailed line work. Like what I can do here is add the structure of to study the image I'm drawing, and add the structure of the ear there, and add some little shadow there. I'm drawing a little extra shadow there. Sometimes I like this technique where you come in there and draw over with a little bit of ink on top of it. Not too much, don't go crazy with it, but it's kind of a fun way of being illustrative with your drawing. But I like to sometimes draw little lines that show the boundaries of the animal. But you can see how, like, we've taken these rectangles and blocked in the animal, and that's been an effective technique to very comfortably get used to the proportions of the image. $20.25. Thanks for watching, and God bless.